335 Morris with another video, and today we are getting some low on the F30 335i. We are installing the Eibach Pro Kit. I will have the model number exactly in the description below, but it is for the rear wheel drive model and not the xDrive. I found that the xDrive one did not drop it a lot, but the rear wheel drive one did. There are concerns about the axle being too low, but remember, this is not coilover, so it's not a slammed and dumped setup. However, I'll make sure I get a good alignment and make sure you tuck that camber in for the front wheels, and this should not be an issue. So without further ado, let's review the tools and the kit itself. So for the tools needed for today's job is very much common hand tools. So what we do have our assortment of sockets says 1/2 inch and 3/4. So you're gonna need E-Torques, Allen keys, as well as torque wrenches, some lights, WD-40 to make it all nice and easy for disassembly. I do have power tools in the back, but they are 100% optional, but of course speed up the process. More metric impact sockets, a torque wrench, a speaker to keep you company, a couple specialty tools, or good to have tools. These are the spline spreaders to open up the hub collar around the base of the shock, as well as a go-through socket. I got this one a couple years ago, which I have very good success with it. As you can see, it's a socket on the end, but there is a pass-through for the stabilizer or drop link. And as well, a set of gloves is always good to have. So I'm not going to cover jacking up the car or moving the wheel, as you would probably honestly assume. So let's jump right into it. Now, inside the wheel well, I have the adaptive suspension, so all this is just a little tab. And this pulls out. So, we'll have one nut on this side, and of course on the opposite side is the bolt, which holds the hub collar. I already sprayed WD-40 on everything to help me make it a little easier. And this is where the go-through socket comes in handy, because this is a T30 Torx, I do believe, which needs to be held to lock so you could spin the nut out of there. And then up top, it will just be these 3 bolts. And once the whole strut assembly comes out, then you need an Allen key with the pass-through socket to remove the nut there. So let's start with the drop link. So as mentioned, you need your pass-through wrench with a 16mm and a T30. So this is the setup. Just like that, the nut is now removed. Now that's removed, the next step is to remove the nut and the bolt. So the bolt is an 18mm, the nut's a 16. As we see, I'm cheating a little bit with the impacts, with one there and a 16 here. You want to get right behind and impersonal. And this is where you're going to put the spline spreader to open up the knuckle. I put a little paint mark just to ensure I know when I put it down approximately the location where it should be. So that is 100% optional, but I believe it should help. As well as once you remove the bolt and nut, this bracket can just be wiggled off. After you wiggle it free just a little bit, remember to have the bottom jack supported. Yes, I know it's not good to have it on the rotors, but I am changing these, so it doesn't really bother me. Take out the 3 16mm. I forgot to show it, but it's, of course, pretty self-explanatory. Then, this entire thing should drop, and with the top loose, you should be able to slide this back and forth. So what would feel like forever, but eventually will get it out. You can still see the line, that's where it's at, and of course, it's where it started. So what I did do, like I told you, I removed the 3 bolts, which, when you remove the 3 bolts, allows this to spin, which of course, as you know, as you're spinning and rotating and pushing this down, helps to free it up. However, if you have all the top ones undone, you basically will have to push this down while pulling this up. And I kind of have some leverage due to my adaptive suspension, but some of you may not have this option. So after you kind of wiggle it and break it free, I suggest you putting 2 of the bolts and slowly but surely lower it down a touch and then readjust the jack. Lower it down a touch, readjust the jack. And as you know, always have the spline spreader inside. Last quick note, don't forget to disconnect these 2 lines. This one is just on the bottom, and of course the EDC controller is just wrapped around it. Let you get your strut out, take your spring compressors. It's not compressed, it's just kind of lined up for me. My appropriate socket for mine is a 21mm, and use whatever size yours is. I would like to make a note, do not use impacts, because this is where if you impact it, these can jump, or sometimes these are not 100% seated, and that's what ends up the spring catapulting across the room. That's what they call these the Widowmaker, but honestly, I've never had a problem because I always use hand tools to tighten these up. So I'm going to tighten these down, and then we'll remove the top hat. Next step is to remove the top hat bolt, which would be a 18mm with the go-through socket, and the counterhold is a 6mm Allen. So just like we did the drop link, this will insert, and this will go all the way through to lock it in place. Make sure you put this aside, so somewhere you can find it. And then remove the spring. If it's kind of tight and kind of off kilter, like the way I have mine, just loosen up the spring compressors so this can slide straight off. Don't forget your bump stop and the dust loop. Now is a good time to show the kit I got. I'll make sure I do drop this model number down in the description below. So let's open it up and see what we have. Of course, we do got some paperwork and warranty. And the springs themselves. Of course, you know that these bigger ones are the fronts and the small ones are the rears. So let's put these in the compressor and put them back on the shock. Also note that your bump stops may not ride the best with a lowered kit. So instead of buying the F80 the Dynon ones, these are basically progressive stops, so I will just be trimming the first little rib here to get a shorter bump stop. Back over here on the ground, you see that the dust cover has this little stop, so that's where you want the spring to rotate and stop. And the same goes for the shock. You want the bottom of the spring kind of to sit right here. So let's reassemble with the trim bump stop and let's get it back in the car. Do want to make a note, however, the front and rear are the exact same coil pattern. There's no telling which one is top and bottom, just by the shape and of course the lettering. You could obviously tell because I don't think Eibach was going to print them upside down. This is the final assembly of the shock. We can see that the top lines up with that nub, as well as the bottom lines up as well. The top nut will eventually just bottom out, but I do suggest you tighten them with the spring compressors on there to alleviate the pressure on the top hat. So now it's just a fact of reverse processing. To fit this down on the bottom, I hope you guys made a marking like I did, so you'll see where it should line up. And of course, connect your connectors of what needs to be the collar bolt, the drop link bolt, and of course the 3 bolts up top. We have the strut back in. You see my plug here connected, plug back here is connected. Attached back, we see the cross member bolt and nut, as well as the top. So that is how we did the fronts. I'll do the other side and make sure then to get the rears on camera. Now the rear is a lot simpler. For example, right now we do have the rear right. So initially we will have to take off this plastic tray. Then there will be these 2 bolts and nuts that will have to be removed. And after that, it is just a matter of prying down and removing this spring. So, like I said, let's remove the bottom tray. So underneath, it is a 10mm for the 4 nuts. For the outer bolt, it is a 21 and a 21. Do remember the orientation of which side is the bolt and which side is the nut when you remove them, so you can have the same orientation when you reinstall. Then for the strut bottom bolt, you need an 18 and an E18 for a counter hold. So the 18 will go to the rear of the car, the E18 will go to the front of the car. Next, we can now see that the spring and the shock is now loose. So all that is needed to relieve the pressure from the bottom, once again from the jack, push down and simply slip the spring out. And here is the old factory spring. Here's a comparison between the factory spring and the Eibach spring. Kind of hard to capture on camera, but align them both, you can see that the Eibach is shorter. As well, you could definitely notice it is more tightly wound to give it a firmer, stiffer ride. So before we install the new Eibach, make sure you transfer over almost this top cup as well as this lower one. Inside, you can see that's where it sits, and you see there's 2 holes which line up with the bottom of this cup. So we're going to make sure this is actually facing outside, so towards you and not towards the car. So once again, it's a similar story, making sure that this stops where it's supposed to in the end, and of course, same story at the bottom. So now let's install. And once you have it in, and that notch like we were talking about just above the hole, you can use the jack to raise it up and perfectly align it and reinstall the bolts in the same orientation. To note, when you're torquing these, make sure you load the suspension with the jack. The outer bolt is 122 foot-pounds and the inner bolt is 74 foot-pounds. So now that's loaded, I'm just going to torque them to spec. And then the rear springs shall be installed. Everybody, that is the install for the lowering springs. I personally found the install not too hard. Fighting with the Knuckle and how it's a friction fit for the front struts are kind of a little bit of a fight. And for the rear, since I just dropped the springs out and put the new ones in and I did not change the bump stops, it was of course a very quick install. So I will make sure when it settles in maybe a few days, I'll include some shots of that because of course the car was just in the air, so it's going to look the exact same. Anyways, thank you for tuning in. I hope you guys enjoy this video and hopefully you guys catch me soon. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and see you guys next time.